Hey everybody, welcome back. We are doing another upgrade video today. And I know you guys, some of you say, wow, you guys do lots of upgrade videos. You just keep doing upgrade videos. I know, but we keep getting asked to do these upgrade videos and customers just keep sending us in speakers that they want improvements made to. So we've probably all year we've had a 4 to 6 week backlog of speakers we're trying to work through and do upgrades for, and we don't shoot videos for all of them, but some of the more interesting ones I'll throw something up in here and we'll do a video on it, so you guys are getting to see just kind of a little bit of what we do here at GR Research. We don't focus primarily on upgrades. It's a small portion of our business, but it's something of big interest to you guys. You're out there as hobbyists. You're always wanting to tweak and improve the speakers that you have. And I know a lot of you guys are taking what you're learning from this stuff and you're making improvements. And I hear back from you and I get emails from you. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate all you guys watching. Let's dive into this one. This is a Focal Cobalt 826. This is a model that originally sold for, I think, around $2,500 US. And it's not a bad little speaker, but it definitely had some issues. So let's just dive right in and let's take a look at this thing. And let's look at the on-axis measurement, first of all, with this grill on. Let's take a look at the response, and as you can see, it's a little lumpy. There's a peak in the woofer's response right around 1300 hertz, 1200 hertz, something right there. There's a pretty good little peak. There's another peak in the woofer's response at 3K, and then there's two huge twin peaks way up there at the very top that is caused from the grill. And it's got a metal grill on it. What do you think? Will that ring? Yeah, probably will, and that may be some of what's going on up there. I'm going to slide this baby off so we can see it a little better, and because the rest of the measurements were taken with the grills off, which made it measure considerably smoother. And if you guys have these and are listening to it, you probably would appreciate listening to it more with the grills off. So let's look at a before and after. With the grill off, you'll notice the whole top end is a lot smoother. So let's look at the crossover responses on these. They did have dual binding posts on the back of them, so I could shoot the woofers independently of the mid-tweeter. And as you can see, it crossed at about 250 hertz, which is a good range to cross these things off in. It looks like 6-inch woofers or maybe 6.5-inch woofers, but they're probably more around 6-inch woofers. Two woofers down below. With the mid up top and a version of what looks like the old TC90 TDX, but it kind of appears to me to be a lesser quality version of that. We used to stock all the Focal drivers back in the day, and we used some of the Focal tweeters in our original Paradox series models that we launched when we first launched GR Research. So very familiar with the Focal drivers. We used to stock all of them. We tested with all of them. We used them in a bunch of designs and stuff. And since then, they've moved on to some different cone materials and things. The tweeters have remained very similar for a long time. And so I know them pretty well. Let's look at the impedance response, and you'll see that it has a dip down at the bottom of 3.3 ohms. If we look at the horizontal off axis, it's still pretty lumpy, and there's a big lump there at 3K hertz. I think a lot of that has to do with the peakiness in the mid-range right up there in that region. And of course, there's still that big peak at about 1200 hertz or so right there in the woofer's response. The tweeter has a pretty wide dispersion, and it drops off pretty evenly up top. Vertical off axis, as we look at that, it's not that bad. Right below the crossover point, right around 2K hertz, there's a little bit of a dipped area there. It makes it a pretty good differential from the peak that's right there below it. So not great, but not bad. Look at the Spectral Decay, which usually tells all. It is not bad either. There's a few of those lumps down there in the mid's response that are holding on a little bit. And of course, when we shot it with the grill on, the grill didn't cause a lot of excessive ringing that you could see in the Spectral Decay, but it did create a couple of pretty big peaks there, and it's pretty rough. Overall construction of it is pretty nice. It's a really nice looking cabinet. What's funny to me, and I'm going to spin this thing around, I've got it on our little lift table, which has a rubber top on it, so it's not easy to spin. I don't know if you can see it here, but they have a little window in the back of the speaker, so you can look in and you can see how cheesy the parts are. I guess they feel like that the average customer really doesn't know what they're looking at, and it just looks cool. But if you know anything about those parts, you'll see a couple of little iron core inductors on the mid-range. You'll see an electrolytic cap, sandcast resistor. You'll see in the tweeter circuit a couple of little poly caps, which are not bad. A little air core inductor, which is also not bad, but also a little sandcast resistor. Now, inside the box that you can't see is the network for the lower woofers, which is a couple of big iron core inductors and more electrolytic caps. So, pretty cheesy parts. I don't mind seeing the iron core inductors, at least laminated iron core inductors, on the lower woofers because they're not playing up very high. What happens is that core through the middle actually holds a little residual charge as electricity is energizing that coil. So what it does to the signal is it tends to smear the mid-range a little bit. It doesn't discharge as fast, so you hear everything kind of drug out a little bit and a little softened, a little run together, and it lacks detail and resolution that you'd get with an air core inductor. However, an air core inductor has to be much larger to be the same value, so the cost goes up quite a bit. So in order to save cost, they use the little iron core inductors, which is horrible in the mid-range. You never want to use something like that above 200 to 300 hertz. But like I said, on the lower woofers, it's hard to hear those differences in bass notes. So it's not as big of a situation or big of a problem. So I don't hit them there. We do that a lot in some of our other designs as well. So that's okay. But in the mid-range, not okay. Let's take a look at what we did with this thing from a measurement standpoint. And let's do some comparison again here. I like when we throw up the before and after. Let's look at the frequency response before, the stock frequency response, and the after, the new frequency response, which is a lot smoother. If we look at the crossover, we can only see the crossover response on the stock one, of course, again. The tweeter mid together and then the woofer separate. And then let's look at the crossover response of all three drivers, the tweeter, the mid, and the woofer separated with the new crossover that we did with it. Now, one of the things we did, tweeter still has a third order filter on it, which is exactly like what it had on it before. We've adjusted values a little bit, but different than what it was, but it's still third order slope. What a tongue tangler. But the mid had quite a bit of breakup going into the higher frequency ranges that really wasn't attenuated very well. There was a couple of peaks going on there, and it affected the response. And so it took a little work to figure out how to get that out of it. And we wound up with a little elliptical filter on there to create the roll-off that we needed at that higher frequency and then roll it off steeply before it got into those ranges where it became a little upset and started to ring and break up. So that worked out really well, and we did a low-order filter down at the bottom. There's a first-order filter on the bottom of the mid, which is just like what they had on it before. And we've got a second-order filter on the woofers. We've got a larger laminated I-core and poly caps. There's no electrolytic caps in the circuit this time. So it created a nice smooth response. Let's look at some of the other measurements. Let's first look at the spectral decay. The spectral decay is a little bit cleaner than it was before, and the impedance curve is still fairly consistent all the way across, and we were able to bring that impedance up to 3.9 ohms. So it came up a little bit. It's a little less of a load on an amplifier than it was before. Now here's where it gets really interesting here, Because the frequency response isn't just about the on-axis, and we never just look at on-axis frequency response. We're always looking at the horizontal off-axis and the vertical off-axis, and sometimes vertical both up and down, and sometimes if it's asymmetrical, we'll look at the horizontal off-axis in both directions. And that tells you an overall in-room response, and that gives you a better idea of what it's going to sound like in your room. A lot of speakers may have a balanced on-axis, but as you go up vertically, there can be big holes in the response. There can be peaks and things in the off-axis, and you're going to hear those in the playback. You're going to hear those in a typical room. It's not going to be a balanced response. So let's look at the new horizontal off-axis, and let's compare it to the stock horizontal off-axis. So stock horizontal off-axis, new horizontal off-axis. This is measured in the exact same way. Notice the frequency response is much smoother, much more balanced all the way across, a lot more even. Now here's where it really gets good. Watch this. The old vertical off-axis response and the new vertical off-axis response. You'll notice now that in the vertical off-axis, it stays relatively flat the whole time. So you could stand up, sit down, you could stand up, walk toward the speaker. Regardless of how high you are in your seating and everything else, it's going to sound virtually the same. We're not causing a big shift in time with this type of network. We're keeping the drivers in phase over a wider range. So it's a much better response all the way across. So we did technical improvements that are very objective. We're seeing it in the measurements, but we're also making significant improvements in how it sounds that are subjective in how it sounds. In other words, the things that are hard to measure, like reduced smearing, more space between notes, cleaner sound, better detail, better resolution, better image layering because we've removed a lot of those smearing effects, better in a lot of areas because the parts quality went up a lot from what we had in here. We've got all polycaps on the mid-range circuit. We've got all sonocaps in the tweeter circuit, which are a huge improvement. Even in the woofer circuit, we're using a big polycap. So good quality parts there. We're using air core inductors on all the drivers except the lower woofer, which is a laminated I-core, just like what they had before. But we're stepping the quality up a little bit. All these coils are made with US-based copper, made here in the US at US Coils. So nice improvement there, and made here in the US. The resistors we're using are the new Dayton copper resistors because that's about the best we can get right now at those price points. They're still very good for what they cost. Big upgrade in parts quality and all new wiring. One set of tube connectors to replace one of the sets of binding posts on here, and the binding posts were really bad. They had steel nuts and tabs on it, so not great. Set of tube connectors, all new wiring, everything you need for this upgrade's $849. I know it's a little more than some of the upgrades we've done because it's a three-way, and those bigger capacitors and big parts cost a lot more. And there's actually 3 caps in here that are 100 microfarad. There's one on the mid and there's 2 in the woofer circuit. So that is part of the reason for the cost right there. Again, should be pretty huge improvement. If this is a speaker you guys have, you've owned it for a while, you want to make some improvements, want to have some fun with it, this is an inexpensive, really, way to go. It's cheaper than buying a lot of new speakers. Two sheets of no-res come with that upgrade as well, which will tighten up some of the cabinet resonances and give you a more controlled bass response. So a lot of improvements here. And that's it for this video, another upgrade. We've got a new one coming. I'm going to shoot it right after this if I can. New Maggie 3.7 eyes. We did a significant improvement and upgrade on those. So watch for that in the next video. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't. We appreciate all you guys subscribing to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.